Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, paladins and druids. Please, please take a seat. Welcome to Story Time with Sanjeet. I have got some fun stuff for you. Please click like, subscribe, hit the little bell in the corner to get your notifications, and let's get to this. I need that. All right. Sanjeet, did you hear? Did you hear? Black Lives Matter is about making us kneel down before black people and worship them and wash their feet, and about making us all turn communist. And that's why you support the riots, is to make us eat your Marxist potatoes. Uh, actually, A, I'd be honored if you ate my Marxist potatoes. B, I'm not emotionally prepared to use violence to get anyone to eat potatoes on any level. And C, this is a completely irrelevant thing for a totally different time, for a totally different video. Thank you, though. I appreciate that. But yes, Black Lives Matter, the movement, the protest, and the riots, they are essentially fundamentally political in nature. Uh, Meaning that they are coming together to raise awareness on a topic involving the community that the community has to vote on, and specifically calling out certain policies, namely policing, that aren't matching up with our core values as a community. Specifically, the punishment should fit the crime, and we like to believe that we are guilty until proven innocent. And that's why in using politics, or politically trying to change the rules for the community, yes, it's not a left thing, it's not a right thing, but it is political in nature, because they want to address police brutality specifically. Police brutality being anytime they're using more force than necessary, or anytime they're using their authority or force in some kind of inappropriate way. And that's exactly what we have here. When it comes to more force being used than what's necessary, especially deadly force when it comes to black people and persons of color in that community by the police. And it's not because black people are bad at society or bad at interacting with police. It's because of an implicit bias on part of the police. All humans have an implicit bias. You have to be trained for it. There's deep, deep research into this for what type of resistance a police officer comes up against by a subject justifies what kind of use of force he can then use. And as you can see, there's quite a few different examples and representations of that use of force continuum. And even now, even if you wanted to pause and look up your own local authorities, look up to see when they can use what type of force against what type of resistance for your own knowledge and safety. As an example, I like to use Florida, where I'm from. What they like to do is they like to put electricity on the green line rather than the yellow line, like some other people do. So in Florida, you can come down to Florida, an officer can issue you commands, you can then cooperate, follow those commands, and if you say anything that comes off as disrespectful or verbally passively resisting, then they can use electricity. So as you're following their commands, they can hit you with electricity and turn you into a Christmas tree. Light you up, buddy. So just a little reminder that nuance matters. It matters. Look up, when can they use electricity against you? When can they use dogs, rubber bullets, chemicals? Okay? But again, getting back onto it, this is something that every police officer has to thoroughly be vested into. Same thing when it comes to lawyers and all kinds of supporting roles when it comes to law enforcement, not just the police officers. This is something everyone has to go over. This is something everyone has to be trained in, be familiar with. An implicit bias is contextually a really big part of it. And without that proper training, this is exactly what we get, is a whole bunch of needless violence, and a bunch of that violence turning lethal against people just because of the color of their skin, because of an implicit bias that all humans share, that holds darker skinned people as a higher threat in a confrontation. And it's nothing personal. It doesn't indicate any kind of malevolence or anything like that. It's just something that a professional needs to be trained for so they can do their job properly. But why is this a problem? Why are they not getting the training they need? Well, when we look at the critical failings of the training, what are they not getting? Why are they not getting it? Here's what we find. A lot of times they don't have the time for the training. Why? Deployment. As soon as they get hired, training has to be cut short to get them on the road. Once they're on the road, they need to be on the road as long as possible before they come back for continued training. They're just not making time for it. Of the departments that do, not all of them have the money. Not all of them have the funding. Of the ones that are supposed to get the money, that are supposed to get the funding, we see a lot of militarization, which means the government, instead of giving them money for the department, will give them stuff like vehicles, weapons, ammo, equipment, things of that nature. And normally, and instead of money, and normally a lot of that time, that stuff will be at like retail brand new equipment prices, even though we're getting it, our police departments are getting it secondhand. So we're losing out on all that money. So when we do have time, when we do have the money, even when the officers spend out of their own pocket, a lot of times they still don't get the correct training. They wound up going out and get warrior training or anything like that, which is based on killology, a totally different mindset for soldiers and people who are in mortal combat, consecutive fights to the death. And that science, the killology, created by retired Lieutenant David Grossman, that whole process calls for brutal action specifically. It can't function without it. You have to use enough force that you completely eliminate the threat with a single use of force, never requiring a second use of force. Specifically, that is its goal. That is how it functions. That is why it is successful in war. That is not what we need for our police officers. That's not what we need. We need them to be trained for implicit bias. It's a real problem. Implicit bias isn't secret racism. It's that initial gut reaction we have to something based on perception, not on reason and logic. And that is how you counter implicit bias, is with critical thinking, is by applying rationale and logic to something. And that's a lot of times, a lot of people will go with a book answer to a solution rather than their gut emotional response. And that's what we're talking about. In a situation like a police officer where they have to make near instant decisions on the fly because life or death scenarios, implicit bias is something they need to be trained not to trust, whether it's good intentioned or not. Same thing goes for in other scenarios, in other professions. Doctors have to be trained that everyone gets the same treatment based on the same complaints and problems that they have. When in the medical community, there was a divide when it came to like knee surgery and knee replacements. Men, when they had certain complaints and certain problems, the book recommended, boom, replace, do this. When women had the same complaints, same problems, instead of getting what the book recommended, which was a replacement, they got pain relievers and anti-inflammatories. And this happened for other things throughout the community. And because it was recorded and observable, and we could go back throughout people's career histories and look at it, that's how they were able to look at it, call it out, adjust, and then things have been better since then. In education, same thing in teachers. It came down to teachers would start punishing students based on their group ethnicity, meaning that if a couple of black kids have already gotten in trouble, the rest of the black kids from then on would get punishments not equal to a first-time punishment, but more like a second or third-time punishment. Whereas like the white kids or the kids that are ethnically the majority, they tended to always get first-time punishments for their first-time transgressions. It's just something that you have to be trained out of for your profession. And it normally does affect the professions that are scheduled super tight or have to make on the fly decisions. And that's why it's super important that our officers, our teachers, and our medical staff get this training and they overcome these hurdles. It is important for their safety, our safety, for their careers, for our communities. It's important. So when the question comes up, oh, do you support the violence? Do you support the riots? You know, like when it comes to Black Lives Matter, yes, I support the movement. I support the protest. I deeply regret the riots, but at a certain point, I don't expect a person to stay on their knees and beg for mercy for an unlimited amount of time. After a while, when the violence continues and the death continues, a different approach is needed. Protests are for words meeting words, for an exchange of ideas and ideas. Protests are not an unlimited tool or a tool to be used for an unlimited length of duration of time or anything in response to violence and death. Protests are words for words. You know, riots in response to violence? Yeah, that's kind of easy to get behind. Riots in response to just being upset because you didn't get your way, because you are so gullible you're willing to believe any internet fan fiction that partially agrees with your worldview, that's on you. No, that's not justified violence. That's not a justified riot. That's not a justified movement. That's a bunch of paranoid, crazy people taking action without considering what's true and what's not. I can't defend those people. That's crazy. That is legit crazy. That is paranoid, crazy people doing violent things. I can't defend that. People begging for mercy, I can defend that. That makes sense to me. So, in closing, we have to do right by each other. We have to do right by our officers. We have to do right by our communities. And we have to put our emotions aside, and we have to put our political beliefs aside so that we can focus on the facts and so that we can get done the things that are necessary for us to continue. Yeah. Please be good to each other, man. We're all we have. You know, I love you guys. Please be safe on the road. Take care. Hey, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Should have a link to a new video. Should have a link to a previous video. Look around, comment. Take care.